In a decision that invoked scripture and the, quote, wrath of a holy God, the Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court created a medical and political firestorm around the country. To discuss how it's impacting Florida, I'm joined now by Dr. Samuel Brown, professor at Mayo Clinic and medical director at Brown Fertility. Good morning, Dr. Brown.
Good morning.
And reproductive rights attorney Courtney Johnson with the Marks Gray Law Firm. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Courtney Johnson, how does this Alabama decision impact Florida?
Sure. So I think maybe if you want to just talk about what the decision was and what it is. So it's the LePage versus Center for Reproductive Medicine, a case out of Alabama. And what happened is that couples created embryos through IVF, and those embryos were then cryogenically frozen. Dr. Brown can maybe talk about how that process works. But the lab where the embryos were frozen was connected to a hospital in Mobile, Alabama, and a patient from that hospital somehow gained access to the lab, picked up a vial containing the frozen embryos, and they're frozen. It's not like an ice cube. It's a sub-zero freezing, and it burned that person's hand. They dropped the vial. The embryos were destroyed, and so the parents, the people who had created the embryos, sued. And so that's how we ended up kind of talking about what we're here about today.
Right. And so this decision basically said that they are entitled to like a wrongful death claim, that these frozen embryos constitute a person.
Yes.
And that has really transformed the landscape of Alabama. IVF clinics are now, pausing their procedures. They're holding off on processing embryos. But it is impacting Florida, too. It's not just confined to Alabama. How is that the case?
It is. Well, we have some concern just given the political climate in the state of Florida. In this legislative session, Florida, a senator was trying to put forth a personhood bill in Florida, and that was actually tabled last night.
Explain what a personhood bill is, because
Sure.
they've been passed around the country.
They have. And so personhood bills are where they're trying to get fetuses assigned a personhood status, where a fetus or an embryo can be legally recognized as a person. And so that implicates all kinds of things in the IVF or medical context, as far as, is there manslaughter if an embryo fails to develop? And it's just extremely dangerous in this context.
Dr. Brown, you've managed more than 30,000 IVF cycles in your career. You run the largest fertility clinic in the Southeast. Does the Alabama ruling concern you, or should it concern your patients?
Yes, it should concern us. And the concern is when our lawmakers and justices make ill-informed decisions, it affects more people than imagined. Mm-hmm. And this is a travesty for Alabama patients. I feel very bad for them. 1 out of 8 couples has infertility, and a really important, wonderful tool we have is IVF to help a lot of couples conceive and have a family. And they made the mistake, maybe out of ignorance, but to say one embryo equals one person, one child. That's the big mistake. They made this overreaching comment, and that is just not in fact. For a woman 35 and under, maybe 1 out of 4 embryos might be a baby, maybe. The other 3 are genetically abnormal and won't make a baby, that are frozen at day 5. A 40-year-old woman could have 8 embryos in cryopreserved, and many times none of them would be a child. And they have to do a second IVF cycle, and it might be 1 out of every 15 embryos for that woman might make a baby, or 1 out of 10 embryos might make a baby. So making that overreaching definition that one embryo equals one child causes lots of problems, leads to overreaching
And for you at the medical level, you're looking at some of these embryos, determining that they may not be viable or may not be survivable without serious birth defects of some kind. So you're having to make a decision to essentially reduce the number or not implant those.
Well, no, the process is you put them in the woman, and the bad ones don't take. 99% of the time, the bad ones just don't take, or that's what a miscarriage is, the majority of the time. So you really don't know which ones are the good ones or bad ones. For the ones we put in the woman, you really don't know. So it's not that exacting. It's not that good.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that great of a science to know which one is going to be the child. And many times, all of the cryopreserved embryos or embryos that a woman makes won't make a baby. So assigning personhood to every one embryo is just inappropriate, and it leads to these overreaching laws of manslaughter. And
So this is one of the unintended consequences, some would say, of the Dobbs decision, and that is the decision that overturned 50 years worth of abortion rights in this country under Roe versus Wade. Did you see this coming with the Dobbs decision?
Absolutely, yes. I practice surrogacy and assisted reproductive law, and all of my colleagues across the country, we've just been waiting for the fallout from Dobbs. Absolutely.
Into the field of IVF?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, because when you want to take the personhood of you can never have an abortion at any point in time, then it also, I think Dr. Brown is right. It was an unintended consequence, but it gets into the realm of IVF as well.
So previously, the U.S. Supreme Court defined viability as something after 24 weeks. And now, basically, it's left up to the states to define when life begins. Georgia has taken a pretty dramatic step in this interpretation. They have guaranteed fetuses with constitutional rights, but they actually include fetuses as an income tax deduction, $3,000 per fetus. And so not only there's not only kind of the health implications for the mother, but there's really actually financial implications for the state.
absolutely, Georgia made a very similar inappropriate ruling where they were trying to give tax child credit for every embryo it's frozen. And again, not all of them are going to be a child. So another overreaching conclusion that's inappropriate. Not all, again, one embryo does not equal one child.
I can share if you'd like from my personal experience. So I'm in this field after going through infertility and using a surrogate to have my son, and it took us 14 frozen embryos to have one child. And those were genetically normal embryos.
Perfectly said.
It's just you've rolled the dice, honestly, is what it feels like. So it absolutely is not one embryo does not equal a child.
It begs the question, when does life begin? That's what everybody wants to argue. And Dr. Howard and Georgiana Jones, who are the pioneers of IVF, had the first IVF baby in the United States that really set the mark for IVF in the world, for modern IVF. He knew this problem was coming. That he foresee this issue, these problems coming and defining life. There was back in the early, probably 20 years ago, he published an article in Fertility and Sterility that was really laid out when is the beginning of life from a scientific and humanist perspective. And it's not when egg and sperm meet. It's not an embryo. It also has to attach to a uterus. So there's three parties basically involved: an egg, a sperm, and a uterus that must be involved. And it also has to get to a certain stage, because there can be early pregnancies that are a cancer called a molar pregnancy, and we don't call that a life. So it's really once you have a heartbeat after about 6 weeks of pregnancy, that's what this paper, the scientific conclusion came, that really should be considered the beginning of life. And then Ohio, the state of Ohio also made an incorrect conclusion where saying that ectopic pregnancies could be saved. And no, that's only going to kill the mother, pretty much. There's no good in an ectopic pregnancy. It's not a life. It doesn't make it to life. And so you see different states really struggling with this concept, like when does life begin and what is life? And
to be clear, 6 weeks is a threshold that a lot of people think is far too early in terms of defining a viable pregnancy, right? Because that's the threshold that Florida is trying to implement, that Alabama and Georgia have already implemented in terms of not an outright ban, but limiting the right to an abortion to 6 weeks.
That's the controversial area in my mind is between 6 weeks and 24 weeks, or I think they set the baby could live on its own after 22, 24 weeks. That's when it's considered to be independent and not dependent on others or the mother. And so, yeah, the gray zone is between 6 weeks and 24 weeks, but not at this early stage. Not, at one embryo equals one life. That's just, they got it wrong. They got it wrong on this.
We're talking about the impacts in Florida after Alabama's controversial court ruling that frozen embryos are children. You're welcome to join our conversation by calling 904-549-2937 or emailing us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. We've got a call. Charles, good morning. Welcome to First Coast Connect, Charles.
Hey, good morning. I was just curious because of the theocratic kind of sounding ruling that the judge made. It just tickled something in the back of my mind, and I'm wondering if this possibly is the same judge that about a decade ago got into a fight over having the Ten Commandments carved in a stone in front of this courthouse.
Charles, this is Courtney. I can answer that. In my research for this, the Chief Justice that said the comment about the wrath of the holy God, I don't think it was the same judge, but the article that I read said that he was an ally and an aide to that judge that when caused the debacle about the Ten Commandments. So I was, maybe his mentor or something like that for sure.
For those who haven't seen the judge's commentary that accompanied that ruling, it's maybe worth reading just a little bit of it. He said, the people of Alabama believe, quote, that each human being from the moment of conception is made in the image of God, created by him to reflect his likeness. He then quoted the prophet Jeremiah and continued, quote, all three branches of government are subject to a constitutional mandate to treat each unborn human life with reverence. Carving out an exception for the people in this case, small as they were, would be unacceptable to the people of this state who have required us to treat every human being in accordance with the fear of a holy God who made them in his image. We have a call. Mark on the west side. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning. My wife and I went through IVF, 20 years ago now, and it ultimately wasn't successful, but it led us to adoption, so everything turned out fine. But at one point, we had 10 or 12 fertilized eggs ready to go, and we implanted like 3 or 4 of them, and that didn't work, and then we decided not to. And actually, I should probably check this out, because for the longest time, we had the remaining fertilized embryos ready to go. We had about 6 of them, and this guy is telling us those are human. Are we going to have to guarantee that they will be implanted in somebody somewhere or us? And if not, we could go to jail or be fined, or that's kind of scary.
Good question, Dr. Brown.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're worried about. That's this ruling leads toward that in Alabama. These poor patients in Alabama. We know the majority of embryos are not going to make a life, and to say each one is a life and have personhood laws behind them is just inappropriate.
So there was a bill that just last night was sort of tabled, Courtney. It was sailing through the House in Florida. There was a Senate companion bill, and it really wasn't until this Alabama ruling got all of this attention and stirred up this fervor that there was any attempt to modify the bill to say that it perhaps didn't include women who are undergoing IVF, and it didn't have any carve out for abortion. It basically said any human life, that's taken is a criminal. It could be a civil complaint.
That's right. It was going to allow parents to receive financial damages, so a civil complaint, for the death of their unborn children, regardless of the stage of life of the fetus. So that's what happened in Alabama. Our current law provides a remedy for those damages, but it defines it as minor child. So if your minor child dies, you can sue in Florida under wrongful death. But they were trying to take that a step further and argue that unborn child, that it would allow for unborn child. Because of the fallout from Alabama, they have the senator who was advancing the bill tabled it.
Excellent.
This would impact. Anything that happens in Florida kind of has national reverberations anyway, just Florida being Florida. But this state has traditionally been a haven for women who are unable to get abortions or treatments, fertility-related treatments in other states. Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi ban all abortions at all stages of pregnancy, and Georgia and South Carolina prohibited after 6 weeks. So Florida has really been a destination for those kinds of procedures. And so laws like the one that was being proposed could conceivably curtail that, right?
Absolutely. absolutely. And it would have also affected IVF. The embryos develop at different stages, and so would you have a potential manslaughter claim against the embryologist if your embryo was developing at day 4 and stopped developing at day 5, which commonly happens? And so that was a huge concern for me with that bill.
We have a call, Philip on the west side. Good morning. Welcome to First Coast Connect.
Good morning. In the Alabama case, the state of Alabama has a state income tax. And if an embryo is considered a child, would that child be able to be claimed as a dependent on the Alabama tax form and be a loss of revenue because that child is a dependent to the state of Alabama?
Good question, Philip. I mean, it's something that we talked about that is currently happening in Georgia, and it leads to some complexities, right? So somebody could conceivably miscarry after they've declared their child on their taxes. And then who investigates? Was it an abortion? Was it a miscarriage? Who is allowed to kind of delve into that woman's private reproductive life to get that answer?
That question you posed, Philip, was actually that's come about a lot in the fallout of this, kind of as a sarcastic. A lot of people are saying, well, I've got 15 embryos in Alabama frozen. I'm going to claim them on my tax return, and then we'll see what the state feels about this. So it remains to be seen.
We've got a call from Mark. Good morning. Welcome to First Coast Connect, Mark.
Hey, good morning. I wanted to make a comment similar to the gentleman before me and kind of your guest talking about a sarcastic thing. Personally, I'm a pro-lifer, but when I look at all these rules out there, I just see the ridiculousness of some rules. For example, in some states, a drunk driver could be charged with 2 counts of vehicular manslaughter if he kills a pregnant woman, even if she was driving to the abortion clinic. And I just see a ridiculousness in the way that we apply some of these laws. That was just my comment.
Thanks, Mark. It has made, in some ways, for strange bedfellows, Dr. Brown, because issues of reproductive rights touch not only on IVF and the right, to seek a pregnancy, but also abortion and the right to terminate a pregnancy. And in this issue, it seems that those two groups have found common ground.
Yes. And the issue is the ill-defined nature of when does life begin? When does personhood begin? And I can understand. I can see the lawmakers struggling with this. And they need to take scientific information to heart. The lawmakers need to get the information. They need to be educated on what's our best understanding of when life begins. It's not when the egg and sperm come together. It's not with the initial implantation of an embryo. It's later. It's later. And then the argument is where's the cutoff for where that could be a viable person. And again, back to the original definition by Dr. Howard and Georgiana Jones in Norfolk, Virginia, with the first IVF center in the United States. It was so forward thinking to show that it's after 6.5 weeks of gestation is when you could consider that a life. It's not one embryo equals one child. It is not the case. That it's just inaccurate scientifically. It's not what happens.
There's another way that this Alabama decision is impacting Florida, and that's in the courts. Right now, there is a proposed ballot initiative that would guarantee a constitutional right to abortion in Florida, and that initiative is being challenged by the Attorney General, Ashley Moody, as well as a Christian conservative law firm called the Liberty Counsel. And immediately after this Alabama decision, they filed a brief in that case citing the Alabama decision as a justification for protecting even non-viable babies. It says that from the moment of conception, quote, an unborn child has a legally protected right of a person. Courtney.
They did, and I saw that. Like Dr. Brown has said, just because egg and sperm meet doesn't mean that it's going to become a child. And I say that as someone, listen, I think embryos are very precious. They're a wonderful potential for life. But every single embryo is not going to become a child. And to try to impart religious theocracy or beliefs upon people through legal channels is not it's not based in science. It's not based in law, and it's inappropriate.
What about I've heard a lot of people question whether the separation of church and state was violated in this judge's commentary that accompanied this decision. What's your take on that?
I think when you use a phrase like you incur the wrath of the holy God, absolutely. But the decision itself was interpreting an Alabama statute from 1872. And, the judges look at it. I think the decision also cited several times that this is what the people of Alabama through their legislatures chose and have consistently chose. They had a more recent amendment. I think it was in 2018 or so, recognizing the sanctity of unborn life. So that's kind of why we have the three branches of government. And if the people have voted in these legislatures and these, lawmakers that enact those type of laws, then the judges in this case were interpreting Alabama law very narrowly.
And because it is interpreting Alabama law, I've heard some interpret it to say that would kind of preserve this issue within the state of Alabama and prevent it from being appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court.
That's what we think, because it did it was a very narrow issue interpreting Alabama law. So there's really no grounds for this U.S. Supreme Court to get involved. That's not to say that in another case and similar fact scenario that the United States Supreme Court couldn't somehow become involved. But this case, as it appears right now, is really just limited to Alabama.
And that's because of Dobbs, because there is no national
Correct.
right. Mm-hmm.
Correct.
We've got a call, Jerry, in St. Augustine. Good morning, Jerry. Thanks for joining the show.
Hey, good morning. Yes, I just had a couple of comments. The first one is I just wanted to point out that especially what we're talking about, lawmakers who are using their own particular religion to guide their choices instead of science, is just a road that personally I feel should not be taken.
Mm-hmm.
And the second question, I guess, or point is there's a lot of exaggerations of what ifs in all these different cases. For instance, I wondered what is the situation that a woman who is pregnant getting hit by a car, that person that hits her is liable even if she's quote unquote going to the abortion clinic. Is that even a law? Is that even something that actually happened? And I feel like those two things that I just mentioned just bring exaggeration or what ifs to these situations,
right,
and make them more volatile.
Thanks, Jerry. There's definitely a lot of what ifs to these questions, unknowns. How do you tell your patients to prepare, Dr. Brown?
Just to try to help answer that question for her. Our lawmakers are responsible to who voted them in office, their constituency, who voted them in, and they're allowed to use emotion with law, and they're allowed. And there are certain circumstances where in my mind, most circumstances should be individualized. Mm-hmm. Individual circumstances. If somebody gets killed in a car wreck and you want to call it manslaughter because she was pregnant. I think all these should be individually interpreted and not blanket interpretation. That's what we're talking about. There's a blanket interpretation here in Alabama that encompasses too much. So these blanket laws, are just inappropriate. Things, in my mind, should be more individualized and taking the circumstances into consideration.
Courtney, last question. Do you have any suggestions about how people should prepare or cope with the possibility that these encroachments will continue?
Yeah, so actually, there was such outrage from this that the Alabama legislators have started. There's several bills being advanced in Alabama right now that said, whoa, that's not what we meant. We're going to claw this back, and we're trying to protect IVF. So I think that is good. I would just recommend continue to stay informed with what the legal status of things are. In Florida, that personhood bill is tabled. It looks like it's not going to make it through the 2024 legislative session. So it's a topic for potentially another day, but stay informed and yeah,
pay attention. All right. Well, Dr. Samuel Brown, Attorney Courtney Johnson, thanks to both of you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.